Brandon stood at the head of my factory floor with three consultants in $5,000 suits, pointing at Gene Sullivan like he was outdated equipment past its warranty date. Gene had been with Pierce Logistics for 35 years. He taught me everything I know about running operations. "We automate 60% of headcount within 18 months, Brandon said, holding up his phone to record something. Basic efficiency numbers. Gene looked at me from across the floor. I gave him a small nod. "Stay calm. I got this." What Brandon didn't know was that 48 hours ago, when he fired me, he'd activated a clause in grandfather's trust that handed me control of this company. Not just shares. Control. "My name's Grant Holland. I'm 48 years old. This is how I took back what I built." The firing happened on a Tuesday morning. Brandon called me into the main conference room, the one with glass walls where everyone on the floor could watch. He had an HR consultant I'd never met sitting next to him with a folder. Effective immediately, he read from a script. "You're relieved of all operational duties at Pierce Logistics. We're offering a transitional exit package through legal." I stared at him. "You're serious?" He slid paperwork across the table. "It's a restructuring decision. My brother, 7 months into his job as CEO, firing me without even looking me in the eye." "You're making a mistake," I said. "The board supports this." Still reading from his script. Then he turned to Gene, handed him an envelope. "We're offering you early retirement. Effective next month." Gene signed without a word. But the look he gave me on his way out said everything. They'd made him choose between his pension and doing what was right. After Brandon left, I grabbed my box and took the side stairs. I wasn't giving anyone a show. Gene was waiting near the loading dock. He pressed a USB drive into my hand. "Look at it when you get home," he said. Then he walked away. "Here's what you need to understand." I'd been carrying this company long before Brandon fired me. It started 19 years ago when Dad had his stroke. I was 29, just finishing my time in the Army, logistics officer at Fort Benning. Brandon sent flowers from Seattle where he was doing consulting work. I moved back home and took over Dad's duties without being asked. For 19 years I was in the office before sunrise. When the 2009 recession hit and our military contracts nearly dried up with the Iraq drawdown, I worked 70-hour weeks. I renegotiated every supplier contract, met with banks, sold off half our older truck fleet to keep us running. I didn't ask for credit. I just didn't want grandfather's company to collapse. Brandon flew home that Christmas in a new coat and told me I looked tired. He didn't know I hadn't slept through the night in 6 months, that I'd taken a second mortgage on my house to make one payroll, that I'd missed Dad's birthday because I was at Fort Bragg trying to save our biggest contract. He posed for family photos. I signed loan extensions in my truck. We weren't close after that. I told myself we were just built different. Brandon knew how to work a room. I knew how to run operations. Both mattered. Both had value. That's what I kept telling myself. That night, I plugged in Gene's USB drive. Took me about 10 minutes to understand what I was looking at. Financial records, wire transfers, email threads between Brandon and someone named Trevor Holt at a private equity firm called Pinnacle Partners. The emails went back 14 months. They started right after Dad got his cancer diagnosis. Dad fought that cancer for 11 months before he died. Brandon wasn't just positioning himself to take over as CEO, he was setting up to sell the company while Dad was dying. The wire transfers showed money moving from Pierce operating accounts to offshore entities in the British Virgin Islands. Started small, $35,000 here, $50,000 there. Over 14 months, it added up to $3.5 million. The emails spelled it out. Brandon was preparing to sell Pierce Logistics to Pinnacle Partners. Strip the valuable contracts, lay off most of the workforce, take his payout, and disappear. I sat at my kitchen table until 2 in the morning staring at those files. Then I remembered something Grandfather told me 4 years ago, 2 summers before he died. It was a Sunday afternoon at his lake house. He called me out to the porch with 2 coffees and an old metal box. "You still take it black?" he asked. I nodded and sat down. He looked thinner than I remembered, dying, though none of us wanted to say it out loud yet. "I need to give you something," he said. "Been meaning to for a while." He opened the box and pulled out a leather folder and a black pen, heavy, with his initials engraved on it. I remembered that pen from childhood. He only used it for major contracts. "That pen's been with me since 1953, he said. "First freight deal I ever signed. Don't lose it." Inside the folder were legal documents. A 38% stake in Pierce Logistics, held in a private trust with my name on it, and a clause at the bottom, handwritten and signed by grandfather and his attorney, Lawrence Beckett. It said, if I was ever terminated without documented cause, full voting rights and veto power transferred to me immediately. No board vote required. Combined with 3 board members I knew would back me, 38% meant control. I didn't know what to say. People change when power's on the table, grandfather said. Your brother loves the idea of running this company more than he loves doing the actual work. If he ever tries to push you out, you'll need this. You really think he would? I think he might convince himself it's the right business decision. That's how these things happen. People don't set out to be villains. They just make compromises until they don't recognize themselves anymore. I looked out at the lake. I'll keep it safe. Use it if you have to, he said. No hesitation. Grandfather died 8 months later. I locked that folder and pen in my closet and hoped I'd never need them. But sitting at my kitchen table at 2 a.m., looking at Jean's evidence, I knew exactly what I had to do. I pulled the metal box down from my closet. The folder was there. The pen was there. Everything grandfather had prepared for this exact moment. The next morning, I called Lawrence Beckett. Larry's been our family attorney for 25 years. Before that, he served with grandfather in Korea. His office still smells like old law books and furniture polish. When I walked in that morning, he already knew what had happened. Your grandfather expected this, Larry said. He gestured for me to sit. I slid the trust documents across his desk. Then I pulled out printed copies of everything from Jean's USB drive, the wire transfers, the emails with Trevor Holt, the offshore accounts. Larry read through it all without rushing. His finger stopped on the termination clause. Without documented cause, he said. Did Brandon give you any performance reviews? Written warnings? Anything? Nothing. Just walked me into a room and handed me papers. Larry nodded. Then he activated the trust. Full voting rights as of 48 hours ago. We file with the board before their quarterly session next week. Then he looked at the financial records, the Pinnacle Partners emails, the $3.5 million routed through the British Virgin Islands. This is worse than I thought, Larry said. He's not just trying to push you out. He's trying to sell the entire company. Can we stop it? We can do better. We can use it. Larry laid out the strategy. We'd present the trust documents first, establish my legal standing with the board, then introduce the evidence of financial misconduct, not as an accusation, as a concern requiring immediate board oversight. Brandon will try to spin this as a family dispute, Larry warned, but numbers don't lie. Once the board sees he's been moving money offshore while planning a sale to a PE firm, they'll have to act. They have fiduciary responsibility. I left Larry's office with a plan and 10 days to prepare. I spent that week doing what I do best. I went through every financial record I could still access, cross-referenced vendor contracts looking for discrepancies, found them everywhere. Brandon had been rerouting our best contracts to shell companies, then buying them back at markup. Buried the costs across different departments. Smart, also fraud. I also found something else. A folder on the shared legal drive labeled Phase 2 Restructuring. Inside were plans for mass layoffs. Jean's name was there, Angela from distribution, Patrick who ran our fleet operations. About 40 people total. Everyone who'd been here since before Brandon arrived. He wasn't just selling the company, he was erasing everyone who remembered what Pierce Logistics used to stand for. I made copies of everything, organized it, built a case file that would take the board about 15 minutes to understand and couldn't be explained away. Then I did something I hadn't done in 19 years. I reached out to people I'd served with in the Army, guys who'd moved into logistics and supply chain work. Asked them what they were hearing about Pinnacle Partners. Turns out Pinnacle had a reputation. They specialized in buying family logistics companies, stripping the profitable military contracts, then selling off the pieces. They'd done it to 3 other companies in the past 5 years. Every time, the workforce got gutted. I documented all of it. The morning of the board meeting, I got to the office at 6 a.m. Larry was already there, placing document packets at each board member's seat. The trust agreement, the financial analysis showing the offshore transfers, the email chains with Trevor Holt. Brandon walked in at exactly 9 a.m. looking confident. He had a presentation loaded up about strategic partnerships and maximizing shareholder value. Then he saw me sitting at the table. His expression froze for half a second. Then he recovered. Grant, this is a closed board session. You no longer have... I have voting rights, I said, kept my voice level. As of 48 hours ago, when you terminated me without documented cause, I slid a copy of the trust agreement toward Chairman Leeds. Per the terms established by our grandfather, my termination activated a clause granting me 38% ownership and full veto power over major corporate decisions. Larry nodded from his seat. His presence made it official. Brandon's jaw tightened, but he stayed composed. Let's not make this personal. It's already personal. What you did wasn't just fire me. It was calculated. I handed out the financial analysis. Board members started reading. Some leaned forward. Others sat back. I could see the moment it registered. Over the past 14 months, $3.5 million has been transferred from Pierce operating accounts to offshore entities, I said. The transfers started right after our father was diagnosed with cancer. They continued through his death and your appointment as CEO. Paul Harwood, our largest outside investor, looked up from his packet. These accounts are registered where? British Virgin Islands, I said. Routed through shell companies with no clear business purpose. Brandon opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. And there's this. I connected my phone to the conference room speakers. Brandon's voice filled the room. If Pinnacle covers the rebrand costs and the West Yard development, I'll authorize the asset transfer. Quietly, no board vote. Frame it as operational restructuring. Trevor Holt's voice. The offshore routing stays clean. Cayman accounts keep it off the main books. By the time anyone catches it, the sale's closed. Silence dropped like a weight. Brandon recovered faster than I expected. That conversation was taken completely out of context. I was exploring strategic options. Nothing was finalized. These aren't options, Larry said quietly. These are wire transfers. Executed transactions. We have the banking records. Paul Harwood set down his packet. I've been reviewing Pierce Logistics' performance history. Brandon, you've been CEO for 7 months. In that time, our military contract renewals have dropped 30%. Employee turnover has increased. And now we're learning about unauthorized financial transfers. He turned to me. Grant, you rebuilt this company after the 2009 recession. You maintained our Fort Bragg contracts when other logistics firms were losing everything. You digitized our operations. You're the reason this company is still profitable. Paul looked around the table. I move that we reinstate Grant Holland as interim CEO effective immediately and suspend Brandon pending a full financial audit. The motion passed 7-0 among the independent directors. 2 of Brandon's allies abstained. Brandon didn't get a vote on his own termination. Brandon stood there for a moment. Then he turned and walked out. I heard the elevator ding down the hall. Nobody clapped. Nobody celebrated. We just got back to work. An hour later, I stood in front of the executive team. Operations directors, department heads, people who'd been here through everything. Some looked relieved. Others looked worried about what came next. No revenge firings, I said. No dramatic changes. Just one immediate action. Every financial transfer from the past 18 months gets reviewed and documented. Full transparency to the board and external auditors. I could see shoulders drop around the room. That includes offshore accounts, shell companies, and any promotions or terminations authorized without proper documentation. We're not burning anything down. We're fixing what's broken. After the meeting, I went back to my office, my old office. Someone had already moved my things back in. I opened Brandon's executive folders on the company system. Larry had restored my admin access within the first hour. That's when I found the full Phase 2 document. It wasn't just a restructuring plan, it was an execution list. Jean's name was there. Angela, who'd run distribution for 22 years. Patrick, who managed fleet operations since before I came back from the Army. About 40 people total. All the ones who'd built Pierce Logistics before Brandon showed up. My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. You were never the shadow. You were the foundation. Jean, I saved it. Then I got back to work. First thing I did was call Jean. He answered on the second ring. You back in? He asked. I'm back in, and I want you back too. Senior advisor, legacy operations. You helped me rebuild what Brandon tried to tear down. Long pause. You mean that? I wouldn't say it if I didn't. When do I start? Tomorrow, if you can. His voice cracked just slightly. I'll be there at 6 a.m. Next morning, I got to the factory floor at 5:45, walked through before the shift change, stopped to talk to the guys in Warehouse 2. Most of them had been here 10, 15, 20 years. They'd heard about Brandon getting removed, but Nobody knew what came next. "We going back to regular operations?" Carlos asked. He ran the loading crew. "That's the plan," I said. "No more consultants telling you how to do your job. No more efficiency studies. You know how to run this floor better than anyone. I'm just here to make sure you have what you need." Word spread fast. By 7 a.m., when Gene walked in, the mood had shifted. People were working. Actually working, not just looking busy because management was watching. Gene and I spent the morning going through every contract Brandon had touched. Found 12 that had been quietly rerouted to shell companies. We drafted letters to every affected client explaining what had happened and offering revised terms at our original rates. 3 clients responded within hours wanting to resume direct contracts. One of them was our second biggest military account. But the big one came that afternoon. Fort Bragg. Major Sarah Crawford from their procurement office called directly. "We heard about the leadership change at Pierce. We'd like to discuss contract renewal." My pulse picked up, but I kept my voice steady. "I thought we'd lost that bid." "You did, under the previous CEO. But we've worked with you personally for 8 years, Grant. Your logistics coordination during the 2012 Afghanistan surge was flawless. 0 missed deliveries under combat conditions. That matters more than whoever could promise the lowest bid. What are you proposing?" 10-year commitment. $8.2 million annually. We want reliability, not risk. I looked at Gene across the desk. He was grinning. "Send over the terms," I said. "We'll have a response within 48 hours. After I hung up, Gene leaned back in his chair. "You know what Brandon's consultant friends would say about that contract? That we should have bid higher, that we should automate the whole operation and cut our workforce by 60%. He shook his head. "They never understood that our people are the value. Carlos and his crew can load a transport in half the time it takes anyone else because they've been doing it for 15 years. You can't automate experience." "That's why we're keeping everyone," I said. The Fort Bragg contract arrived 2 days later. I sat in my office after everyone had gone home, pulled grandfather's pen from my desk drawer, heavy, solid, his initials still etched on the side. I clicked it once, then I signed. That weekend, I drove out to grandfather's lake house. Nobody had been there in months. I sat on the same porch where he'd given me the trust documents 4 years ago. I thought about what he'd said. That people don't set out to be villains. They just make compromises until they don't recognize themselves anymore. Brandon probably convinced himself he was doing the right thing. That selling to Pinnacle Partners was smart business. That the old way of running things was outdated. Maybe he even believed laying off 40 long-time employees was necessary for the company's future. But that's the thing about compromises. Each one makes the next one easier, until you're routing $3.5 million offshore and firing the brother who saved the company because he's in the way of your exit strategy. I'd spent 19 years trying to understand Brandon, trying to see his side, trying to bridge the gap between us. I was done trying. Monday morning, Larry called. "The audit's complete. Brandon moved $3.5 million over 14 months. Most of it's still in the offshore accounts. We can recover about $2.8 million with the right legal pressure." "File whatever you need to file," I said. "There's something else. The board wants to make your interim CEO position permanent. They're voting Thursday. What do you think?" "I think your grandfather built this company on a simple principle. Do right by your people, and the numbers take care of themselves. You're the only one who still believes that." Thursday's board vote was unanimous, 9 votes in favor, including the 2 who'd abstained on Brandon's removal. Paul Harwood made a short speech about generational leadership and long-term thinking. Then we moved on to regular business. No applause, no ceremony, just back to work. That night, I got a call from an unknown number. Didn't recognize the area code. "Grant Holland?" "Speaking. This is Trevor Holt from Pinnacle Partners. I wanted to reach out about a potential partnership opportunity." I almost laughed. "You're calling me? Look, what happened with Brandon was unfortunate, but we still see value in Pierce Logistics. If you're open to discussions." "Here's my counteroffer," I said. "You stay away from my company. I don't forward your recorded conversations to the SEC. We done here?" Long silence. Then he hung up. I deleted the number. 3 months later, we'd recovered $2.6 million from the offshore accounts. Hired back 2 people Brandon had quietly forced out. renewed 4 major contracts including Fort Bragg. Revenue was up 18% over the previous quarter. Gene was training his replacement. Turned out his son had been working in logistics at a competitor. We brought him in as assistant operations director. Kid was sharp, had his father's instincts and a degree in supply chain management. Angela expanded distribution into a new regional hub. Patrick modernized our fleet tracking without cutting a single driver. Carlos's loading crew set a company record for on-time deliveries. 12 weeks straight, 0 delays. I still got to the office at 5:45 a.m. Still drank my coffee black. Still used grandfather's pen for the important contracts. Some people would call this revenge. Getting fired, coming back, taking control, pushing Brandon out. I call it protecting what matters. 6 months after I took back the CEO position, we held our first all-hands meeting. Everyone from warehouse staff to senior management packed into the main floor. I stood on a loading platform so everyone could see me. "I'm not going to give you a motivational speech," I said. "I'm just going to tell you where we stand." I pulled up a slide. Simple numbers, no fancy graphics. Revenue is up 23% compared to this time last year. We've renewed every major contract we nearly lost. We've brought back the people who were forced out. And we've recovered $2.6 million that was illegally transferred offshore. Carlos whistled from the back. A few people clapped. More important than the numbers, I continued. 0 layoffs, 0 outsourcing, 0 consultants telling you how to do jobs you've been doing for 20 years. That's not changing. Angela raised her hand. What about expansion? We've been hearing rumors about new contracts. We're finalizing a deal with Norfolk Naval Station. If it goes through, we'll need to hire 30 new people over the next year. Warehouse staff, drivers, logistics coordinators. We're promoting from within first, then hiring. The energy in that room shifted. These were people who'd spent months wondering if they'd have jobs. Now they were thinking about growth. After the meeting, Gene pulled me aside. "You know what you just did? You gave them certainty. That's what Brandon never understood. You can't run a company on chaos and fear. People need to know they're building something that lasts." "That's what grandfather taught me," I said. "He taught you right." The Norfolk deal closed 3 weeks later. $12 million over 5 years. We hired 28 people in the first phase. Carlos moved up to warehouse supervisor. We brought in his younger brother to run the loading crew. Gene's son, Michael, turned out to be exactly what we needed in operations. Kid understood the old-school values but knew how to use modern systems. He set up an inventory tracking system that cut our processing time by 35% without eliminating a single position. "How'd you do that?" I asked him. "Easy. I asked the warehouse guys what slowed them down. They told me. I fixed it. Nobody ever asked them before. I promoted him to operations manager after 4 months. Paul Harwood called one afternoon with news. "We're getting acquisition interest. 3 companies have reached out asking if Pierce Logistics is for sale." "We're not," I said. "I know. But 2 of them are offering significant premiums. Thought you should know. Appreciate the heads up. Still not interested. Didn't think you would be. Just wanted to tell you that what you've built here, what you've protected, it's worth a lot more than money to a lot of people." That hit differently than I expected. "Thanks, Paul. Your grandfather would be proud." After I hung up, I walked down to the factory floor. Evening shift was just starting. I stopped by Gene's office. He was training Michael on quarterly projections. "Got a minute?" I asked Gene. We walked out to the loading area, watched the crew prep a shipment for Fort Bragg. Like clockwork, everyone knew their role. "You ever think about what would have happened if grandfather hadn't set up that trust?" Gene asked. "All the time. Brandon would have sold to Pinnacle Partners. They'd have stripped the contracts and laid off 60% of the workforce within a year. Another family business destroyed for short-term profit." "You saved more than a company," Gene said. "You saved 400 families. We saved it. You gave me the evidence. Larry gave me the legal strategy. The board backed the right call. I just did what needed doing." Gene shook his head. "You did more than that. You showed everyone that the old way still works. Loyalty, reliability, taking care of your people. That's not outdated. That's the only thing that matters." We stood there watching the crew work. Carlos's brother was new, but he was learning fast. One of the veteran loaders was showing him the right way to secure a pallet. "You know what the difference is between you and Brandon?" Gene said. He looked at this floor and saw costs to cut. "You look at it and see people to protect." I didn't have a response to that. Didn't need one. A month later, I got a voicemail from an unknown number. Didn't recognize the voice at first. "Grant, it's Brandon. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I just wanted to say, I made mistakes. A lot of them. I convinced myself I was doing what was best for the company. Turns out I was just doing what was best for me. Anyway, I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just wanted you to know I see it now." He hung up. I saved the message. Didn't call back. Maybe someday we'd talk. Maybe we wouldn't. Either way, Pierce Logistics was moving forward. Year-end numbers came in strong. Revenue up 31% compared to Brandon's last quarter as CEO. Employee retention at 94%, highest in company history. Customer satisfaction scores improved across every metric. The board voted to take the company in a new direction. Not public, not selling, building. We established a profit-sharing program for employees with more than 5 years of service. Set up a training fund for young workers who wanted to develop their skills. Gene announced his retirement, for real this time. Michael was ready to take over as director of operations. On Gene's last day, we threw him a proper send-off. Everyone from the warehouse staff to senior management showed up. 35 years, Gene said in his speech. "I've seen this company almost die twice. Both times, Grant brought it back. I'm leaving it in the right hands." After Gene left, I promoted Angela to VP of Distribution. Patrick moved up to VP of Fleet Operations. Carlos became Director of Warehouse Operations. The people who'd built Pierce Logistics were running Pierce Logistics. I still get to the office at 5:45 a.m., still drink my coffee black, still keep grandfather's pen in my desk drawer, ready for the contracts that matter. Last week, a business school professor called asking if I'd speak to her class about successful family business succession. I told her I would, but on one condition. I wasn't talking about succession planning. I was talking about protecting what you build from people who don't understand its value. She agreed, because here's what I learned. Revenge isn't about destroying someone who wronged you. It's about protecting what they tried to take. It's about proving that the right way, the hard way, the way that takes 19 years of showing up before sunrise, still works. Brandon's out there somewhere, probably telling his version of what happened. That's fine. I've got a company to run, people to protect, and contracts to fulfill. That's all the victory I need. And every morning when I sign something with grandfather's pen, I know he'd agree.